strategy for a particular art gallery, and what does that involve and entail, and kind of doing some fact finding around who they are and what their baseline is, and see if we can improve certain things in certain areas. And then the other is just actually like really hardcore software development, where we're using software to solve complex business problems inside of art galleries, and that has been obviously really interesting, but it's certainly a complex problem, and so there's a lot of different kind of interesting things going on there. So it's good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds good. Sounds innovative, which is what we like to hear about here in ArtEvolve. So I guess I will kick us off and introduce you and say, hello, everyone. And I am, in case you don't know, I'm Annika Eriksson, founder and CEO of Articheck, and this is ArtEvolve. And here with us, I know, right? Here with us today is Frank, is it McDermott? Sorry, I should know yours.
Yes, it is.
Of founder of Caravan. And I actually became aware of you and reached out because of an ArtEvolve series. So see, this works, right?
It works, yeah.
Meet people, get more ideas, collaboration, partnerships. We're already chatting about some things, so that's exciting.
Yeah, for sure.
And Catherine Lowe says hello. Says hello. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Catherine.
Nice to see it. Actually, I'm just gonna see. I'm gonna check out the attendee list because I think I spotted earlier my old friend Kit Merritt. Yep, she's there. Hi, Kit. Nice to. Thank you for joining us. And Gareth from Sotheby's Institute earlier. I did say, come on down, and he has done so. Thank you, Gareth. Nice to see you. He is the head of the new logistics course at Sotheby's Institute, relatively new, last few years. So that's pretty cool because Lord knows we need a lot of logistic people in the art world, and I don't think that they've had much of specialist course offerings before now. So yeah, and Renee, nice to see you as well. Renee is a collection management specialist, and Simon Dent too. I've seen you at a few of these. Thank you for joining us tonight. And so yeah, some familiar faces. Nice to see you all. And I think we should get started without further ado. So hold on, we've got something in the chat. Oh, I've already dealt with that. So if you have questions, please remember when you are using the Q&A box and also the chat. And actually, sorry, this is for the chat. When you're posting to chat, it will default just to panelists, to us. And people get this confused all the time. So I'm just letting you know, if you want everyone to see your chat, then you have to toggle over to panelists and attendees. So just FYI. And feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A box or indeed in the chat, and we will try and manage both of them as we go. And I am happy to welcome you all here this evening and sorry, I'm just setting up my little views here, to talk about online sales and how they will no doubt continue in 2021 and beyond.
Yeah. Future is our oyster.
Absolutely. And in fact, something that I was discussing in my last call just today, which I think we can all agree, is that the pandemic has been a bit, I'm trying to find the right word that I can say publicly.
Unfortunate.
Annoyance, a bit unfortunate and tragic, for many. And actually, I don't want to downplay that in any way. It's been hard for a lot of people, and in all kinds of ways, personally, work-wise, health-wise, economically. So yeah, I don't want to downplay that or make light of that at all. But when I'm always looking for, the silver lining in things, right? I'm a kind of classic optimist type. And for me, one of the silver linings with this is that, there are opportunities out there that are coming out of this. And one of the opportunities are, simply for people to deal with things, I don't want to say festering, but like, things they've noticed, in the last few years probably ought to be dealt with. This is the time to do that. And I think for a lot of arts organizations that sell, selling online well is probably top of the list of those things, right?
For sure. It's the thing I say is that this has turned this a lot from a novelty into a necessity. And I think, in that, obviously, when you're forced to think about something, there's a lot of opportunity that can come of that. And you can think about things in different ways and try to make a positive impact on your organization. But sometimes that's a real challenge, and to change kind of what you were doing and how you were doing it to accommodate this, really unknown situation has been super challenging for a lot of people, certainly within our organizations, because it's not necessarily has necessarily been a critical part of the day-to-day operations.
Which, when you think about it, is kind of crazy, right? I mean, when you think about I know you work with other industries and other sectors, and so I guess that's probably something which is underlined for you on a regular basis, is kind of how different the art world is than other industries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could talk about that for days, because I just love comparing them, because the art industry in and of itself is it has such a peculiarness to it in a great way, because the customers are so different. If you're trying to sell something on Amazon, there is a different set of criteria that you need to consider than if you're selling to a billionaire. And and I use these two terms to kind of set like a broad example. But I think the thing that I always kind of stress and take away from it all is that you need to know your customer in order to be able to sell to them. And I think as you consider who your traditional customer is, and how you would sell to that person traditionally, what is how do they want to be sold to in this new way? And then, is there a new customer out there that you can look for that might be like your existing one, or you might be able to find and take advantage of that, which is what, digital tools and e-commerce are really all about. It's not just about selling to the few, it's selling to the many. So.
Well, and that's exactly what should be the driving force, right, for the art world to go online when it comes to sales. I've heard a lot, and I think most recently, I'm trying to remember his name now. I was on a webinar about the art market that was put on with Anders Pedersen and Art Tactic, and young collectors who also had their own kind of art tech businesses. And this particular business was looking at kind of demystifying, the art world for emerging young collectors, right? And the founder kept saying, I'm forgetting his name now, but it'll come to me. He kept saying, it's the same 5,000 people, right? The same 5,000 people are buying stuff all the time. There's like 5,000 collectors out there, people. They're getting older. What are we going to do? This is something that we have to do something. And, younger, even their children. And this is basically a webinar discussion with essentially that. These were like 3 young collectors who 2 of whom I think at least came from collecting families. And they were talking about how they would like to be engaged with. And these are, tech savvy folks who have their own art tech companies. Or one of them was in fashion and art and kind of merging between that. And one of them had a foundation and, was interested in the philanthropic side of the future for the art world. And, it's a really important question, how, and my kind of key takeaway from that talk was they were saying, we think it's important, like in fashion and like in other things that are trying to sell to us, for you to create a community and online content that is engaging and interesting to me as part of your audience and community. And, so, it's not rocket science. I mean, that's what other industries are doing, right? And I think fashion is a really good one to look to think about this, because of course they do deal with millionaires and billionaires, right? So and they have been doing that successfully online as well. And so we do have some, guiding lights that we can look at. And am I right in thinking that some of your clients are also in the fashion industry? Or
Indirectly, I don't know if we work with any, fashion houses in particular, but we work with modeling agencies and people who kind of service that part of the business. And I would say that, across the board, knowing who your customer is super important, and knowing how they want to be sold to is also super important. And I would say that there's no right answer when it comes to any one of these, and it could be different for every single person. I've had the opportunity to interview a lot of, salespeople within the art world and externally, and say, you know, what's the easiest way to sell something, and it's when someone has that reaction to it that just makes the rest of the process really easy. When I talk to people who sell fine art for a living, when someone goes in there and sees a piece of artwork in person and gasps, then the deal is done. Like it's a question of the logistics at that point, because it's that emotional reaction we're always trying to shoot for. And as that tries to get translated online, because that's one of our biggest challenges as Caravan has been to really how do we articulate that emotional experience online, and how do we get people to have that. It's become this really experiment in being able to find the right mechanisms for that. A lot of the internet now is very visual, and that is really conducive to the art world because it is such a visual medium, or it certainly can be at times when it needs to be, if it's not inherently. And I think, it's just making sure that we are talking to the right people who want this stuff, and understanding, the mechanisms behind it, because selling a piece of artwork in person and selling it online, is really a different skill set entirely. Although the way you might approach it might be similar. I mean, there's always needs to be a story. There always needs to be this reason for someone to buy something. It has to be good art, right? But to be able to translate that online is a totally different skill set that we've really been able to specialize in over the last 11 years, essentially.
well, one of the things that I definitely feel is that taking the in-person experience and trying to just replicate that online doesn't really work, because it's just not as good, right? You don't get as much of a gut feeling, and I appreciate that we are trying to get as close to that as we possibly can. But my personal feeling is that the important thing is to utilize the strengths of the internet and being online, right? And not just try and fit a kind of round peg in a square hole, as it were, but to and personally, I don't know what you think about this, but I believe that the future is going to be a kind of a hybrid situation. It's not going to be. It's not like we're going online now, guys, and say goodbye to any in-person sale is never going to happen again. I don't think that's probably the future.
I mean, every salesperson I've ever talked to, and I specifically ask this question often, is like, have you ever used your gallery's website and used it just exclusively to make a sale? And every single person said no, right? You can only really sell artwork in person. Now, obviously, that's changing over the last few years, and one could argue that the auction world has been selling art for people that haven't been there for many years. But those kinds of customers will never go and purchase art directly unless it's something that they're truly passionate about. And once passion comes into the equation, the rules are kind of off as far as how you sell to that person. It's really whatever needs to happen will happen.
Hmm.
When you're trying to generate sales, when you're trying to run e-commerce as a business line, as a way to transfer whatever it is you own or have and sell it online, whether it be, poster or catalogs, or whether it be the fine art itself. It has to be done with intention. You have to know that this is something that's going to be really important for you to do. I mean, it is so easy now. One of the hardest parts about e-commerce for, since 2000 or before 2010 was that the barrier for entry was super high. You had to really, invest in your e-commerce platform to, do something. Now you can sign up for a Shopify store and spend $80 a month, and you're pretty much good to go, or
Mm.
at least you're able to start the process. And maybe there's honestly like 10 hours worth of work to do after that to really get things dialed in. But then you're doing e-commerce. Now, unfortunately, certainly when it comes to selling art, that's just kind of where you need to start, and you have to consider the initiative, much farther down the line, in order for it to be successful. But getting involved in e-commerce is not the hard part anymore. It's knowing what to do and why are you doing it, that I think is something that most people can answer, but they don't know how to answer it in this particular context. And I think, one of the things that we do as Caravan is help solve that problem, is of like, why are you doing this, and how can you use this effectively to support your business or grow a new business line, out of it. Because that's what the real purpose of e-commerce is, not just to make certain things available to the public. It's to generate revenue. Well, that's the hope
Sure.
anyway.
Absolutely. Well, when I was thinking about this earlier, some of my discussions today and yesterday, uh, I was telling kind of the story in the lecture at the Sotheby's Institute this morning about, how I became an entrepreneur and how Articheck got started. And one of the things we were talking about is, yeah, this kind of journey, and the fact that we'd always intended to do, have three channels essentially for sales: the fully automated channel, the semi-automated channel, and the face-to-face channel, right? And ideally, the face-to-face channel is like the high value sales. The mixed channel is the kind of medium value sales, and the fully automated channel is the low value sales, right? And of course, in our case, we had the challenge that conservators, independent conservators who represent usually the lowest value, are also like the highest touch, which is why we've actually started to largely ignore them, sadly. Um, but so, but we also had the challenge that, we were operating in the art world. We're a SaaS company, a software company. With most SaaS companies, if you want to buy Slack, you go to the website, you peruse, you sign up for a subscription. You don't expect to speak to anyone. That doesn't happen. And so, but it's a very different, scenario in the art world. And so, of course, we had to get a kind of an automated channel up and running, but it wasn't our first priority when we first started. Our first priority was really the face-to-face stuff, because that was how it was going to happen, especially in the early days. Now we get some more inbound traffic, we get some organic sales happening, but that is after, 7 years of graft of the face-to-face stuff.
Yep.
And we had to build it kind of along the way as we could, but it was never our, we couldn't put all of our eggs in that basket, even as a software company, just because we're servicing the art world, because it is such a, face-to-face just industry and place traditionally. And so I can really understand, what people are going through in terms of their kind of, reluctance in the past to invest a lot of resource of time and money and energy into this, because you're taking a punt. You don't know how successful or it's going to be, or how engaged people are going to be. Again, silver lining of the pandemic, everyone's forced to be engaged with the online world. So you can now, feel pretty confident about taking that punt. It's something that's always been on your agenda for a while, but, now is the time to really go for it.
Sure. And I think, the business model is different. Just as you've experienced in running a technology company, it's much different to running an e-commerce store or a more traditional company. And I certainly agree with you that there is going to be this hybrid approach to these kinds of things, where people are going to want to be sold, completely in person, and people are going to want to be sold completely digitally. And for the moment, those price points are going to be controlled a bit. Certainly, in as much as the regulation is there, is you can't really sell that high value of thing online without doing a lot of different additional checks. The transaction will need to be manually intervened at some point, at least for the time being. And so, you're already kind of defeating the purpose in some respects. But again, if you have the right intention, you can go out and service a lot more customers in a meaningful way. And I think to your point earlier of the younger audience and how they want to be sold to. In the past, it was a very traditional thing. It was about relationships. It was about attending to individuals' needs, and you found those out through having individual relationships. Now, when you look at it digitally, if you're going to buy Slack, this is an instant messaging service just bought by Salesforce. You're going to do some research online. You're going to do what are the best instant message apps. Google that, and you're going to read all the things that are available to you because it's important to you. One, because you know that there is inherent value in it, and two, it's because there's no consultant that you can call and say, hey, go find me the best instant messaging software and get it installed. It's unnecessary at this point. When you translate that kind of experience into buying art, there is this adage that online now someone needs to read 12 independent things in order for you to make an informed purchasing decision on something. And if that's the case, then you really need to be able to supply that content. You need to be able to control that narrative as it pertains to you, your brand, your artists, and being able to have a back office operation that can support that kind of stuff, because it's not natural. It's not something that you intrinsically think about when you are selling art, certainly in a traditional way. And if we've learned anything over the years, is it's an experimental process. It's an iterative process that is founded in data and extrapolation in order to make informed decisions moving forward. I kind of equate sometimes these things to exhibitions. If you have a physical exhibition and you have a physical space, and you are able to design that space to be the most compelling, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of effort, there's a lot of skill that go into that. And I think if you can imagine it in some respects, is that your online presence is some kind of exhibition. It is a showcase about who you are. Would you want to treat that with the same intensity, with the same intention? And I think always the answer is yes. But the problem with that is that that's not the only thing to consider. You have time, you have money, and you have expertise to deal with. And I
And you
think
also want to.
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. You
No.
also want to, when you've got people, it's one thing to get people to your website, and then it's another thing to sell to them, right?
And there's a whole process. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of thing that you deal with before even someone gets to your website, and then
Right.
then the real work starts of trying to convince them that what you have is valuable to them. And that's all come down to, because the great thing about this is that we have the ability to like laser target these initiatives now. Before, you would take an ad in the New York Times, or you put a billboard up, in a more traditional industry. And now it's like, no, I want to talk to Annika, I want to talk to Frank, and we can do those things now. And that's like kind of the cool thing about it. But with that, you need to know, that we are that person's ideal customer. We need to know that these are who we want to target, and understanding someone at that level, you have to build that. That idea of that new consumer, because it's not your existing customer now. That billionaire, I guarantee you, does not use Instagram to buy art. I guarantee you, they may pay someone to use a computer for them and print out their emails, and that's okay. But having a great Instagram strategy is not going to influence that customer. But it will influence that new customer that you need to look for and try to carve out who that person is. And
That's
there's a
really
lot of
great
mechanisms
point.
involved to do that.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. And that again goes back to this idea of these like 3 channels, right? You can have the face-to-face traditional channel. You don't have to mess with that model. If it works for you, keep it going, get on the phone with the guy who prints out his emails. It's cool. You have, that you're sort of hybrid, bit of both channel. And in our case, we do a lot of video calls, right, with people for our, in our sales process. And we have to normally make some kind of contact with them first, whether it's online or offline, at an industry event. And then we'll make a date for a call with each other. We'll encourage them to have a look and try things out beforehand, and then we'll go through their pain and the benefits and all this kind of stuff in the call. And with the and then encourage them to do a trial, and then from there hopefully subscribe. With the fully automated channel, your hope is that they find out about you, whether it's through an organic search or through our social media channels, or Instagram, or this webinar, or however it may be, and they might become interested to find out more and check us out, and just self lead, and then decide to do a trial and to buy. And as I was saying earlier, it's taken a long time for us to kind of get there, and we were really lucky that we, by fortuitous circumstance, happened to hire our first really senior, digital marketing person, like, in March, just by coincidence. And yeah, she quickly set up this ArtEvolve thing, and quickly helped us hone and refine our marketing and sales processes to have like a real proper digital marketing strategy and process. And there's a lot more involved with that than you might think, and you have to have a lot of ducks in the row, because it's a complicated structure. And when we kind of dabbled at it ourselves before, we were inexpert, and we didn't know we were art people, right? We didn't really know what we were doing, and we messed it up a couple of times when we tried it in the past. And a really important part of this is getting advice from people that know what the heck they're doing and have experience in it. I'm especially in the art world, where first impressions are really important. It's a small world. You don't want to mess things up, right? In terms of sending out, I don't know, an email campaign where you're addressing them with the wrong salutation or whatever it might be. So I think that's one big piece of advice that I can give is make sure, whether it's on your team internally, or a trusted advisor externally, or freelancer or contractor, whatever it might be, that you have some really good advice from someone who knows what they're doing, like Frank, and can kind of say, okay, well, this is what I think. This is a plan that I make for you.
And I think to that point, that's definitely something that we specialize in, because in as much as there are a lot of amazing tools out there, and it is a complex problem that you need to make sure that you have everything aligned in the right direction in order to get the most out of it without spending as much money. Because anything with technology, and certainly when it comes to this, it is an amazing opportunity to waste an enormous amount of money. And I have this saying is that if you were to spend 50 grand on digital marketing, or if you put 50 grand in a pile and set it on fire and uploaded that to YouTube, what would you get more press out of? What would you get more bang for your buck? And I think that is it's a litmus test for whether or not something is good. And do you know that if you spend that money, you will get return on your investment, right? If you're going to take an ad in the New York Times, you kind of assume that it's going to work because of just what the New York Times is. That equation is understandable by most people. When you are targeting a certain demographic in a certain geographic region, in a certain using a certain device, you don't know if that's going to work necessarily, because maybe unless every single person of that ilk, then you have to experiment, and you have to inform your decision in order to get to that point.
Well, and
just like you've defined the process over the years, of trial and error and experimentation and doing all these other things, you need to know what worked for you and what doesn't, and that just requires intention and analyzing your data. So.
Exactly. And I was going to say that's part of what adds the complexity to this whole thing, is being able to make sure that you're laying the groundwork so that you then can go back and analyze the data. Because we
Yeah.
had that problem for years, that we would try things and we would have kind of um, gut feelings about how something went, or we had some evidence, but we often didn't have the kind of real detailed evidence that you can get now. We didn't necessarily know, how many links, how many people clicked on a particular link from a particular email, for example, which is really basic by, digital marketing standards. But in the art world, it's like, what?
But you don't even think to do it. And that's the whole point, is that, it's a different frame of mind. And, only when you understand what it is, then can you understand how to use it. And I think that's where, a company like Caravan has really, made an amazing, um, 11 years out of this, is that we've understand both sides of that and been able to come to like really informative conclusions that have, made a really big difference for our clients. And I think, it's not something that you would necessarily do on your own. When you're running a small gallery or a small art institution, you are there because of the art. You're not there because of the e-commerce. um, but only
Absolutely.
because the e-commerce has played an important role in how things are going, that you need to consider that. And when you're in that business situation, let's just think about it for a moment like that. um, you have a very objective means to analyze that situation in order to do something about it. And typically one of those things is to go get help. You don't have to do it yourself. But and in doing so, in the very least, get an informed opinion on certain things. And one of the things that we do often is we run discovery phases for our clients, where we do a baseline analysis of the brand, of the brand identity, of the brand presence. And we kind of try to put those into three main categories. One is your digital presence, one is your digital outreach, and one is your digital operations. And that trifecta of situations and services, allow us to evaluate, not only where you are, but what can you do to make things better. And it's a pretty defined process, especially in the art world, because um, there is this lag, certainly, in adopting technology, but also there is this time necessary and needed in order to understand how it's going to work for them. Because we're not selling pencils, we're selling that objects that have perceived value versus intrinsic value. And I think that is, and I'm making a generalization here, obviously, but I think there is an important part of that to consider. And most of that is informed with data. That's the great thing about this, is that we can pull this all together and have an informed opinion versus a gut opinion. Which might be more useful in selling art in person, to be honest. You don't need to analyze, what this person's BPM is, and I don't know, whatever metrics you want about having the person, how many times they've glanced at it. Those things don't matter when you're selling art in person, but when you're selling art from afar, these are critical metrics.
Well, I think you still, even when you're selling in person, you are definitely looking for certain signals, aren't you?
Yeah, oh,
In
absolutely,
the
yes.
sale, they're different signals, but important signals nonetheless. And I think we've got some chat and questions to look at. But just before we do, when you were talking, it was making me also think about something that we're really grateful that we hired this new starter, Mackenzie, who all of you who watch this ArtEvolve regularly will know, because she usually hosts it. Is that she calls herself a performance marketer, right? Which
Sure.
is, that term. Probably a lot of people here don't. It's basically about tracking, just what we were talking about, tracking things, setting targets, setting goals, realizing those goals, and being very performance driven, rather than this kind of setting money on fire thing you were talking about. It's like there's a lot of vanity metrics out there. There's a lot of ways that you can, as you say, kind of spend money on digital marketing without really knowing what you're doing and where it's going and how it's actually going to help you. And so it's so important to be as kind of laser focused, as you say, as you possibly can. And there is a real art to that. It is a real specialism, and you might need, a couple of different people to advise you, both in terms of, what's technologically possible, but also, there's a lot of psychology in this. There's a lot of understanding of sales and marketing, and yeah, it's a whole thing. But so why don't we look at a few of these chats and questions?
And just to really quickly interject there too, it also comes down to the actual digital property itself. There is an optimization around how certain content is laid out and what's the user experience. The industry term is called the customer journey, and how someone gets from even first finding out about what you're doing to buying something, and understanding how that what that path is, in order to really be able to double down and inform your opinion on what you're going to do at each stage of that. It's a critical part of any hardcore e-commerce strategy. It's not necessary. I would say, if we wanted to kind of cut this up, and we're talking about some complex stuff here, we're really simplifying it down. There's a few key things that we can talk about later, but it doesn't need to be all numbers all day long. But I would say that it's really important to understand that there is many layers to this problem. So.
For sure. I totally agree with you. And actually, one thing, don't let me forget to talk about too, is that I do want to talk about is the Hiscox online art market report and what they say about the biggest barriers to online sales. So, but we'll get back to that in just a second. Let me just see. Simon Dent is saying, art critics had an important role in the old model to give and validate value. Perhaps it would be interesting to involve them in the online mediation process.
So I 100% agree with that. One of the key parts about selling online, and this is coming down to selling anything, is your content marketing strategy. And so you are creating content to inform the customer about what it is you're doing. And I would say that there is, bear with me on this analogy here, but like if you're going on Amazon and you're buying something, you're going to read the reviews, and that's like a very traditional standard e-commerce protocol, and that is how people inform their opinion on things. When you're dealing with high valued items, reviews don't matter because there only might be one of them in the world. But what does matter is people's perception of it and how other people are going to perceive it. Both the value itself and who owns it. Go ahead.
I would also interject that you might think, who cares what Joe Schmo from Kansas says about this thing, right? You need an expert.
If you love it, then you love it. That's the best part about art. No one cares if it calls to you. That's the reason why it exists, and that's the reason why we love it. That should never be forgotten. But
well, I would also say that, for example, for like restaurant reviews, I always take this with a pinch of salt. Right? Because I'm always like, how can 500 people think this Chinese restaurant is good? Right? It's terrible. And so
everything needs to be taken with a grain of salt,
But if you have, in the case of art, like in the case of art critics, if you had someone that had a reputation, that was known, that was an expert in an area, and they're the ones that are saying, this is great, and certainly that could be wrapped in, high-end content. Like, for example, actually, before I spoke with you the first time, I was having a little peruse around Gagosian's website, and I was really enjoying, because I love Gregory Crewdson, and I was really enjoying the Gregory Crewdson stuff. It was like interviews with all these different people. I didn't get to see the Kate Blanchett one. I still mean to go back and have a look at that, but there was something with, forget his name now, it was an LA-based journalist, I think, was touring around, the exhibition. But there was also a thing with Gregory Crewdson and a musician, and they were talking about, their inspiration, and it was really great. It was really interesting, high-end content that I really appreciated. And if they had an art critic, there too, that would have not surprised me at all in the context of, who was there and what was being kind of talked about.
And absolutely, and I think for you, this is taking that situation, for example, is that you resonated with like two or three different aspects of that experience, and that is going to stay with you. And that's part of the reason why we're talking about it now, right? And
Mm.
if you look at how your customers, if you run an art gallery, are talking about you or talking about your gallery, we need to be able to have these moments, because we may not be able to have them in person, period, pre-COVID or otherwise, or post-COVID, but also the internet, and I'm using air quotes here, is this an amazing medium for that stuff. Is we can produce these things relatively inexpensively. We don't need a massive equipment to do this anymore. Some of the stuff we can do on our iPhones if are clever about it.
Well,
And
and this is an example, isn't it, of like
sure.
utilizing what is good about the internet, as you say, and something that you're not just replicating in person, right? I don't normally get to sit down for a fireside chat with Gregory Crewdson, unfortunately. So, that is like an added bonus of it being online that I wouldn't normally get.
But I think the point there too is that um, this is part of a larger strategy. You look at Gagosian, for example. They've done an amazing job of communicating, to their audience and to new audiences what is valuable about the work that they're showing, and they have a very defined way of doing that, even though it might be completely bespoke every single time. Right? There is a method to it, and it's really hard to have or sorry, it's not hard necessarily, but it's not obvious sometimes how that works online. And they've put the time into it. They've really spent the last 10, 11 years working hard at trying to solve that problem. In as much as we've, as an industry, have spent many years understanding that exhibitions are a critical part of the problem, the process, prior to all this. And getting back down to why is this important from a digital and e-commerce perspective, is that this content is great. It needs to exist in some respects. And the thing I always say is, no matter what I do, whether it's digital marketing, whether it's building an amazing website or amazing e-commerce store, the content is king. It must be great content in order to expect great results. There is nothing that I can do from a technology perspective to make this better. It's always going to be whatever the potential energy is in the artwork itself. I can help amplify it. I can help maybe give it to new audiences, but I can't make it a success. I can't make Led Zeppelin out of your garage band unless I have many years. It's like
Yeah.
it's just not possible.
Totally.
um
And so one really important thing is to really fully leverage, that great high-end content. And that's one of the things that I have thought about. We're planning a progressive art world conference, we hope in June. And one of its purposes is to encourage and foster collaboration between the public and the private sector. And for example, I feel like a lot of great high value content that is created for art fairs and OVRs over the last year, could be better and more fully leveraged if, for example, galleries made a deal with museums where they let them have the content, but they were credited, and there was a link that then, could drive traffic back to the galleries website. Because let's face it, these 5,000 people, it's the same people, right? The collectors and the philanthropists, the donors, same guys.
yep.
So the public and the private sector really could collaborate online a lot more, or at all. I don't think it's happening whatsoever at the moment. But although no, saying that, actually, I was again referencing Gagosian, pleasantly surprised to see that in their e-commerce site they had some stuff from LACMA, right? From the LACMA gift shop that they were selling. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there was some stuff.
Sure.
So I believe that a percentage of that income goes back to LACMA. So that's great. More of that.
Well, and I think that's one of their kind of strategic initiatives, is that they're able to work with other brands and other agencies and other institutions to understand that both can benefit from that. And some of even their commercial enterprises, you look at their collaborations, you look at the way their artists collaborate. and how Gagosian has been able to be a part of that is very telling, and it's a very defined strategy. Now, could you sell ode masters that way? I don't know, but if you want to sell contemporary art, it's a critical tool in your toolkit. I think it's
Well,
one of those things that you need to be able to consider.
I will tell you that I have a friend, Chum, who's 80 years old. He's an Italian Baroque art collector,
Sure.
and he sends me stuff about, online talks that are happening and about the art market. And I'm like, oh, thanks, So there are
Well,
a few of them
he's
out there.
plugged in.
He
That's
is.
he's interested. But that's probably one of his passions is he loves to learn about these things,
For
and
sure.
not to use your friend as an example, but like if you look at that, that he's genuinely interested. He loves the art, and he'll want to consume content around the things that he loves. Right? That's kind of human nature in a lot of respects, and one of the goals and one of the requirements of art galleries these days is to produce that content, and doing it again, circling all back around is with some intention, because just putting great imagery on the internet or putting a video on Vimeo and linking it, it's like it's not really going to do the job. You have to get in front of people. You have to get people to know about it. You have to have that broadcasting platform to uh, take full advantage of it, in the very least.
Exactly. And so Soraya, who actually was a panel speaker here on another ArtEvolve
Yep.
before Christmas, which was also about this, a related topic about kind of the online space from a sales point of view. She's a digital transformation consultant. And she is saying, wonders what your take is on selling art through AR and VR.
Sure. um, I'll go with an example. I got pitched this idea to have an artist work with us who was independently wealthy, and he was a technology executive for a long time. He ran his own company, and his passion was creating art, and so he wanted to do that. And he has these amazing sculptures that he created, and because he was really informed with technology, he created actually a VR application custom built for his art. And so, in my mind, the way I view this example is a very bespoke, very custom solution, and we used it, and it was extraordinary to see these artworks in this virtual space and do these kind of things. But it was not. It was a novelty. It wasn't necessary for me to consider purchasing this artwork. And in as much as I enjoy VR, I still sometimes, have a physical reaction when I'm using these things. And I think that always is going to get in the way. Now, the cool thing about VR and AR is that it can be part of the process. So one of the things that we've always heard from every single salesperson selling art, whether it be online or otherwise, is that, the customer always wants to know how big it is. Is it going to fit on their wall, or will it look good over a mantelpiece, or whatever in the room, anything. And I think AR can play a informative role in that, even though it might be a lackluster experience than going through and maybe installing it for a day or a week, custom for that art collector. And maybe for some art collectors that's still necessary and still warranted, but for most, it's an enormous expense for galleries to do that. And so if they have the ability to do that virtually, and still get most of the job done, there's a huge consideration for it. VR,
Well, and also it's such a lower price point, right? I mean, I have used recently, I saw it was an option in Amazon. I was looking at something, and it was like augmented reality on my,
yeah.
for my cheapy thing that I don't even remember what it was now. But yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that could be useful for any collector, right?
Well, sure, and especially when you're talking about doing it to a larger audience, you can't pass around that single piece of artwork, over over and over again to thousands of people's homes. I mean, this is unrealistic. But if
Mm,
you are looking to have, a certain part of your inventory sold online and make it available in this capacity, to the right people, it can make a huge difference. VR is a little bit different because you're involved actually putting a device on your face. You have to get people to use it. There is a learning curve with even using some of these things, and even now post COVID, we have to deal with contamination and make sure things are safe. That people are actually touching and using, which I think all of these concerns are um, overcomable, or you can overcome them. The challenge is, does the customer want it? I would say, does the customer need to be sold in this way? And I can certainly imagine a situation where that's true, and I can certainly imagine where it's not. These things are not ubiquitous at this point, but they are tools in our toolkit. If you are even maybe running a digital gallery or selling digital things, it might be really conducive for you, and it might be worth the expense. But as it comes to translating a physical experience into a virtual, realm, I just don't think it's quite there yet.
sure.
It may get there, and I think it's in all of our interest to try to solve that problem. I think Facebook's puts the big money behind it, and I think if anyone can do it, they can. Their CTO of Oculus is got one of the smartest guys I've ever known. He's done amazing things, and if anyone can do it, he certainly can. But there's still an enormous amount of work to be done, across the board. So
Well, so I'm conscious of time. I want to uh, talk about for a moment, and then we'll get to a few more questions. I mentioned the Hiscox online art market report. So this has been with us for 5 or 6 years now, I think. And one of the things that it talks about how the art market in 2019, the online art market was valued at around just under 5 billion US dollars, and that it is forecast to increase to just under 10 billion, so just about doubling in the next couple of years by 2024, which is a very sharp, steep hockey stick type curve compared to what it was doing pre-COVID, I have to say. And so there's clearly some incentive and motivation for people to be thinking about investing time and resource into this channel. And I will also say, Articheck plug for a minute, we are putting on these things, that their biggest finding for the last 5 years has been that the biggest barrier to online sales is a lack of physical inspection and a concern over condition. And so our kind of messaging to a lot of these platforms that are doing online sales, and to auction houses and Artsy and all these different folks, and also to people like ArtLogic and different kind of integration partners that we're in conversation with, is that they should take this seriously, basically, and they should reduce that barrier by providing an interested buyer with some information about a physical inspection.
what's up, buddy?
There you go. So
Mama, I remember something that
hold on
I
just
can
a
have
second.
one.
Sorry, guys, this is not supposed to happen.
Well, I'll take that opportunity to talk a little bit about, when it comes to what Articheck is great at. I think, it's in servicing digital operations and making the process more smoother, even for art galleries that sell entirely in person. Being able to outsource a lot of these kind of, more critical pieces of your operation are just hugely important. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you.
I was trying to carry the torch. Yeah.
So some commercial galleries that we work with in New York requested this year, as a part of this thinking, to do a summary sales report which we have done,
Okay.
and it's now available, so that galleries can attach this either directly on their website or in an online viewing room. We've been talking with different art fairs who don't want us to name names because they're very much like that. But some of the bigger art fairs that are out there who recently introduced tools to allow you to attach PDFs that are related, whether it's the artist statement or a biography or a condition report or one of this, kind of physical inspection brief summary reports. Again, for interested buyers to have more information, like you were talking about at the beginning of this chat, which is, we really need to move from a kind of more opaque, mysterious industry that we are into being more transparent and giving people the tools of knowledge if we want to drive online sales, because that's what the online space is all about, right? The benefit is that you can scale up, you've got a massive audience, but the thing that you got to realize is that you can't obfuscate from them. You have to give them the power of knowledge of what it is that they're going to buy, because they are inherently a little skeptical, right? Because they need to know, that you're a reputable company that is selling to them in the first place, that they can trust you, that they can trust what you're doing. Is this potentially a big price item that we're talking about? And even in the beginning of Articheck, we didn't list price because we just frankly weren't sure how to price it in the early days, right?
Sure.
And so, but we got a lot of like mistrust because of that. People we'd start the sales process on a back foot with people being like, why aren't you putting your pricing on your website? What's wrong with you? Are you trying to scam me? And frankly, in the early days, we did kind of feel like, well, we'll try to get more money out of the people that can afford it because we don't know, we have to kind of figure this out. But what we quickly realized is that you just can't do that online. If you want to sell online, you have to be transparent. It's scalable. You just have to have your standard pricing. It has to be the same for everyone, and that's it. Even if as a dealer, you feel like, well, I can get more from Bob because he likes me and he's a billionaire, so he'll pay twice as much. Maybe that works at the very, very high end of things that you don't want to list the price for, but generally speaking, it's just not a model that's going to work anymore, guys.
Yeah, and I mean, I think when you're trying to sell a service or any kind of physical good online, transparency is always going to be important. Whether or not that translates into price, honestly, I'm kind of a little bit on the fence as far as that's concerned. I think if you're buying something commoditized, you want to make sure that you're not being ripped off. If you're buying a pencil or sponge or cleaning supplies or something like that. But if you're buying a valuable piece of artwork or a piece of artwork in general, regardless of the value, people are going to buy that because they love it, not or because it serves some kind of specific need for them, and they're not going to buy it because it's $9.99. And I think the takeaway that I've had from all of this is that it really comes down to providing good experiences online. Trust is an enormous part of that. People do business with art galleries traditionally because they trust them, because they know that they're going to get what they want at the end of it. They don't have to put all this time and energy into it, or that gets evolved over time because of the one-to-one relationship you have. Going back to my point of you need 12 independently piece of content in order to make an informed decision about something. You have to provide that to them, and you can build that trust with your potential customer in a lot of different ways, through the content, through the description, through being able to see it maybe in the again, the number one most important influencing factor in e-commerce is imagery. Having great images of something and having the real images, not renderings. And the second thing is going to be reviews. And so if you kind of translate that to the art world, is that you need to have like stunning photography of all the things you're trying to do, whether it be a poster or the real work. And then also being able to validate that it's worth something, because it whatever the value is to that customer has been articulated well. Traditionally it's been provenance, and it's been through the history of the work, especially if you're looking at secondary market things. For primary market, it comes down to a lot of other factors, which we can determine the validity of, and debate each one. But the reality is that, people love it, or they love it for a variety of different reasons. And that needs to just be articulated. better. When you're dealing with like maybe traditional tools or templated tools, you mentioned a few different companies before. Those are great, but what Caravan really specializes in is bespoke solutions that really address a specific situation or specific story that we're trying to create. And we've developed software over the years that really help accommodate that. And when you hear the word bespoke, typically that means expensive, but it actually doesn't need to be that expensive. It needs to be well intended. And if you have good process, you can save a lot of money as you go through that in order to really get the most bang for your buck, return on investments, because that's what these things should be. They should not be cost centers unless you intend them to be.
Let me go back to the chat and questions, because I think this relates what you're talking about, and we are actually at the time now, the 6 o'clock UK time mark. So let's have a few questions for those that are happy to stay a few more minutes. Adam Fields of Arta, nice to see you there, Adam.
Is that Adam?
Yeah, he asks, do you think the trend of galleries rolling out their own storefronts and e-com capabilities like Gagosian and Zwirner will continue? Or do you see sellers opting to list on sales platforms like Artsy and Artland? What do you think?
I think in the short term, the answer is going to be both. If you look at general e-commerce trends, going direct to consumer has been a huge trend for brands, over the last 5 years, say. And I think as the cost and barrier for entry for any company, specifically art galleries, to enter into e-commerce has decreased significantly. The ability to do that more effectively is increased, and I think that's made it available for more people. The Gagosians and the Zwirners of the world, they have the extra opportunity and extra responsibility to do that in an extraordinary way. And I think that is where some of the innovation will come in doing some of this. But I think, every art gallery, are they going to have a Shopify store in the next 5 years? Probably the answer to that is probably. Will everyone still be doing business with Artsy and companies of that ilk? I think that's for Artsy to determine, honestly, because they are stewards and responsible for making conversions for their customers. I've heard a variety of different things about working with Artsy that have in some situations been really beneficial. In some situations maybe it still needs more work. And so that part of the situation has not completely been hammered out, so to speak. And I'll go back to the 5 key tenets of any successful e-commerce experience. Is 1 is know your intentions, 2 is know your customer, 3 is know your product, 4 is know your numbers, and 5 is know good people that can do the things for you that you need to get done. And if you can't, if you don't have good answers to those 5 situations or those 5 pieces of information or 5 questions, then you probably shouldn't do it. Because it's going to be an enormous waste of time.
When you say know your numbers, do you mean your budget?
I mean across the board. Know your analytics, know who's coming to your website, where they're coming from, why are they coming there, and then how do you use that information to inform your decision about where you spend your money. And have a process around that, or at least work with a team like Caravan that has a good process for figuring that out. It's knowing your budget and knowing how much you need to spend in order to, get the most return on investment. You might have $100 million to spend. That doesn't mean you should. You should have a process for determining exactly how much you need to spend on these things in order for you to get, whatever it is you're looking for. And success here is loosely defined. You really need to spend some time to actually define what success means for you. But these things are very doable. And I think, as the trend of direct to consumer, as the trend for allowing people to find what they're interested in a more meaningful ways, you don't need to just Google search to find this out. You can have the Instagram algorithm help facilitate that, and whatever is next.
Well, side note on
all these
Artsy.
things, so, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Side note on Artsy. I did a talk in New York, September 2019, the last time I went to New York, which is weird to think because of the pandemic, I for the Art Innovators Alliance, in which we had the Artsy CTO speaking with me, and Daniel, and who's no longer there, but he was saying he was a big proponent of price transparency, and he was talking about how he felt that it was important because mainly of investor collectors coming in, and that they need their due diligence, and that is very off-putting when they can't even find like how much a Warhol should be, right?
Absolutely.
So
and you look at companies like ArtNet who have turned having information about art auctions into an actual product that you can evaluate your art portfolio in some respects. I mean, these are things that require a lot of data, and price is certainly one of them. And to turn that into concepts of e-commerce is that they know their customer. They know that type of customer needs this amount of information to make an informed decision. When they can't do it, that decision making process has been halted in some way, or there's friction added to it. And only is it because they want to, or because they've had other pieces of information to augment that, will they continue down that process? And if you think about things, again, the traditional concept is the sales funnel, going through and being able to get people from different stages of your sales process in order to get them to make that informed decision. Or, again, another industry term is called call to action. They're saying, we want them to do this one thing. What is it that they need to know and do in order to do this one thing? Mostly it's to buy something, right? Or to sign up for something. Growing your email list is another huge part of this. Getting all of these mechanics of doing business online, working in your favor. That's the real challenge in a lot of this. So.
Well, I think that's a really good point. And I would love to take one more question before we end, if we've got a few minutes. But an excellent point is the call to action, because that's something that I have grappled with a lot. I know in my own business for so long on our website, we were like, okay, do we want to emphasize free trials or talking to us? What should it be? And it can't be sales. You can't just be like, buy, because it's not going to happen, right? So it has to be, like you say, kind of, yeah. I like to think about a sales process as, imagining someone on a kind of balance beam, and you're there like spotting them, making sure that they don't fall off of that balance beam, right? And they're just not going to leap to the end of the balance beam to the sale. You have to nurture them over to that place. And so if you are pushing buy on your website, at least for us, and I imagine this is probably true for galleries and everyone too, it's off-putting. People don't like that kind of hard sale stuff. So that's why for us it was, okay, demo or free trial, which one should we emphasize? And we've experimented with different things. And in emails too, it's always like, okay, is it to join our email list, or is it to what are we trying to get from it? But you're absolutely right. It's always so important for every communication with any client that you have to think about, okay, even when I'm just writing a physical email, it's always, okay, what's my call to action? Is it to have a call with me? If so, is it at the end? Is it short and sweet? Is there a link where they can immediately book a call with me? Yes needs to be the answer to all of those things. So I think that's probably a good takeaway for a lot of people from this, if nothing else, is to make sure that whether it's a automated online process or emails or whatever, that for their sales process, they're always thinking with every touch point with a potential customer, what is my one call to action for this communication?
And I think when you're doing traditional sales, it might be a little obvious, and it might be really specific, right? You're the reason why you're reaching out, or the reason why you're contacting your customer. When you're dealing with that online, there is a very analytical approach, and one could argue even the buy it now, or the traditional like discount, like you sign up and get 15% off. These are mechanisms and levers that you can use to influence how people interact. the awesome thing about the art world, in my opinion, is that there is a level of creativity is with everyone involved, that we can think beyond the numbers and we can do things creatively to get things differently. And the great part about my job is that I get to not only work with these people, but also to implement their ideas in a meaningful way that might have a positive impact. And so you don't need to just like ask for an email because you're just, that's the thing to do. You can do it in a tasteful and meaningful way, or you can provide something of real value to someone in exchange for information about them that builds that customer experience, and it builds that trust with the brand, and builds that brand loyalty in a way that is not really available in a lot of other industries. If you're trying to sell flooring, no one cares about being creative. Either they're going to sign up or they're not. If you're trying to sell Picasso, it's a whole different ball of wax. You have a lot more different types of tools in your toolkit to influence that decision.
Ironic, isn't it? Because it's like the art world is starting from further behind a lot of other industries in terms of their digital engagement, partly because of that very reason, because it's a complicated sale. And so it's like they have to actually do much more, but they're starting from a point, behind. So that's challenging for sure.
You can see farther into the future. And I think, let's take a viewing room, for example. No one knew what a viewing room was before 5 years ago. But I think the reason why it exists is that someone needed something that is a little bit different than the traditional like website or a digital landing page. They needed to think a little bit outside the box and address their customer better. Now, is it still this lowest common denominator experience, because most viewing rooms or kind of look the same and work the same? Yeah, but that's a great starting point. If you think about how we can augment that experience into the future and use data, design, and software, those three tools can make it something like truly extraordinary and truly unique. And again, back to that digital experience and having that emotional reaction. If you can do that consistently, because your customer, what they want to see and hear. If you look at a Nike ad, there you got Michael Jordan there. It's like it's a win-win, because it's just going to come out good and cool. And not that every customer needs a Nike ad with Michael Jordan in it, but if you can think creatively in that level, there is all this potential from a creative side that maybe you're not going to get from a traditional e-commerce experience, or it's certainly not warranted.
Good point. So the final question we're going to take is someone collecting data statistics how high the volume of digital sales is compared to traditional discreter channels, and in addition, since the pandemic forced dealers and galleries into digital sales. I think it's safe to say the answer to that is no, they are not, but it would be nice. We'd all love to know the answer to that. But part of the problem is these discrete sales, traditional channels are, they're discrete and they don't talk about it. Even with art fairs, we know from art market reports a couple of years ago that they represent 40% potentially of art sales, but we don't have any further stats and metrics on that. And I have to say, this is a lot. And I know that some art fairs like Frieze in the very early days tried to get the galleries to report certain metrics so that they could, participate in art market reports and things and have some more data. And the galleries refused. They only want to report, good results, and a few of them, and they don't really want to talk about not so good results. And maybe understandably so, but unfortunately the effect is that if we don't have a lot of data, there are massive holes in art market data, and part of that is because it is so analog. So that would be something that would benefit us out of having more online sales, is that we could get to know more about these things.
Absolutely. And but the cool thing about art fairs or physical art fairs was the fervor and the interest. Everyone was there to buy and sell art, and when you have enough people in a room to do that, there's some great things that happen, and great deals that are made, more specifically. And that type of experience doesn't necessarily exist online. Maybe you can have an online auction or something, but the problem with some of that is that most of your potential customers, if you're going to an art auction or even participating on one-on-one, you want to be there and you made the time to be there. Most of the people that are potentially new customers, they're all at work. They're in a conference, room with a meeting, talking about something else entirely. And it's certainly, being able to be sold when you want to be sold to is an important part of all this. And how data, influences that is collecting a lot of this information about, what are they buying? When are they buying it? Where are they buying it from? And looking at these things. Now, it's really hard to do that when you have, starting with, say, from scratch, you have 0 sales, and you have, very few people coming to your website. But there is a process, a very defined, discrete process that you can go through to go start to analyze that and push the ball forward. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit concepts that you can apply to what you're doing to, start to build that data set. And then it becomes a very iterative, informed process about how you move forward. And again, it doesn't cost a lot of time or a lot of money, but you have to have the intention and the will to go through and spend the time to do that. Much like, and not to glorify it, but you spent 7 years figuring out how to sell Articheck, and you've done an amazing job of doing that. And that was an informed process. You were able to spend the time and money and energy to go through that. And everyone that wants to do e-commerce needs to do that. It's not something that you can skip. You can't skip these steps in a lot of ways. You can get creative, but you need to kind of go through this, and you need to inform your decisions along the way. Because that is the best part about all this, is that why people are coming to your website. If you're tracking it, why people are buying your stuff, because you can track it. You don't need to just hope that someone has an emotional reaction to something, or you think something's beautiful and therefore someone else will. Or more importantly, if you are able to know what your clients are looking for, you can look out for them. Or what maybe certain collectors have, you can go ask them if they want to sell it. These are very traditional mechanisms, but there's no correlations online. You need to have your data set aligned differently to help inform that decision-making process.
So I think we better, now that we're 17 minutes past the hour, we better stop it there. Although I do want to say, I just had a thought, which was because I was thinking about, poor small galleries that can't afford to necessarily to purchase your services, Frank. But you were talking about how, for kind of a digital transformation kind of consulting advice, that first step, it might not be so expensive. And I was just thinking that for a lot of small galleries, it might be, a similar story, right? And maybe if there's any of you out there listening, smaller galleries, maybe you should get together, the kind of equivalent of like Cork Street, consortium, and approach Frank as a little group and say, we've drawn up a list of our goals and what we want and where we're at, and can you help advise us as a group, and bring down the cost of advising us individually. Maybe something like that would be something to consider.
That would be amazing. And to be clear, I try to be, democratic in how we kind of approach and help people. I'm really lucky and able to do what I do because I love it. And I love making a difference in people's businesses. I am an entrepreneur and I love business and I love art, and it's amazing that I get a chance to do this every day. But to that point, this doesn't need to be this certain, you need a certain amount of money to participate in these kinds of things. There are different levels of entry into this, and you can certainly get from one stage to the other, if we're lucky enough. But working and starting off that things and at least making, getting an informed picture about what it is available to you, because it certainly doesn't, it's not necessarily something that you can Google or figure out on your own, and have a level of success at it. Although that's certainly possible, it's very rare. Working with a firm like ours, even for a few hours a month, will be, have an extraordinary impact. And so, if or you want to come to us as a group or just have any questions, I'm happy to answer free of charge, just to help out, because I think, as we all learn what to do and how it works for our specific customers, there's always going to be opportunity there. So.
Well, thank you. And on
Yeah.
that note, I think we better, oh gosh, there's even more, things in here. Name of Frank's firm. That's a good thing to end
Oops.
with as well. Caravan. There you go. Yeah, we've got a link there. And I like also Saraya's comment about most gallery websites don't even have an inquire button. They function as archives, not selling machines. Challenging the mindset is the real challenge.
Yeah, right.
Agreed.
And I think
100%.
to that point, we've kind of put our art specific services into a discrete company called ArtOps, and you can check us out at artops.net. And Caravan is kind of the parent company, if you will, and that's crvn.net. It's Caravan without the A's. Very clever, I know. And I was going for like a really short email, and so that was the closest I could get. And definitely reach out to us. Both do have inquire buttons, so please use them. Inquire forms, and love to talk to anyone that's interested in learning more about this.
Great. And Jim Fenner, I'm sorry. I know you asked a lot of questions here and I didn't get to ask them. We're just very, very, very over time now, but I suggest that you reach out and the channels that Frank just mentioned. And I hope everyone has a great evening and rest of their day, like you, Frank. And soon it's the weekend, which I'm looking forward to. I just
Friday.
First spring flowers in my garden today at lunchtime.
Oh, congratulations! Yes, very good, very good. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure. You guys are doing amazing things, and I really appreciate taking the time to chat. Looking forward to the next one.
Thank you. Me too. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to also continuing our conversation about how we might collaborate in the future.
Yes, absolutely.
So
thank you so much, everyone. Cheers. Have a great rest of your week and have an awesome weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.